A host of Republican U.S. legislators have called on President Joe Biden to step down, a demand that surged in the hours following deadly bombings around the airport in the Afghan capital, Kabul. Among them was GOP Senator Josh Hawley, who said Biden has now overseen the deadliest day for U.S. troops in Afghanistan in over a decade. He added the crisis is growing by the hour. The lawmaker said, quote, "This is the product of Joe Biden's catastrophic failure of leadership." Meanwhile, Marsha Blackburn, another Republican senator, also called for the resignation of Biden. Vice President Kamala Harris and several other members of Biden's administration. The senator said they should all resign, that is, or face impeachment and removal from office. Over a dozen U.S. troops were killed and at least 18 were wounded in multiple explosions in Kabul on Thursday. Max Parry joins us from New York. He's an investigative journalist. Max, it's good to see you. Now, would you agree with the GOP senators, or would you say, would you put the blame all on Biden, or would you perhaps say this is a failure on the part of multiple U.S. administrations over the past 2 decades?
Well, the entire American foray into Afghanistan has been a failure since Operation Enduring Freedom was launched in 2001. As for this specific attack, I do think that there's many questions surround the intelligence failure in the lead up to the attack. As your segment mentioned, occurred, in an territory in an area controlled by the United States. So, as the Taliban pointed out themselves. So, to me, the timing of this attack and the circumstances in which it took place are incredibly fishy, given that this gives the U.S. now the perfect excuse to kick the can down the road again in the endless war, and another pretext to remain in the country militarily, where Biden now has to retaliate against Daesh or this affiliate in the Khorasan province, now widely being referred to suddenly as ISIS-K, which is said to be behind the bombing.
Now, Max, some would say that's a serious allegation, and some would say, considering America's history, that's not such a serious allegation.
Well, it's really not. I don't think any discussion of this can happen without recalling how ISIS originated in the first place, and how, in the past we've seen how Washington has frequently used Daesh as a strategic asset to achieve its foreign policy goals. There was actually a very important DIA memo, declassified, from 2012, which proved without a doubt that the establishment of an Islamic State, or what the documents called a Salafist principality, was something that was actually desired by the United States and its allies when they started backing the Syrian opposition in the Syrian war in an effort to conduct regime change and depose Bashar al-Assad. And John Kerry, Obama's Secretary of State, was caught on tape stating that the U.S., as it saw their support for the Syrian opposition give rise to ISIS, they hoped to manage the situation, as he said it, because they thought it would force Assad to negotiate and potentially step down. So we know in the past the way the U.S. has used Daesh as a strategic asset to achieve its own goals. And it was the Russian intervention beginning in 2015 to help Damascus that thwarted that regime change attempt. But nevertheless, we know that the U.S. has used ISIS in the past to its own advantage by its own admission. So
right.
With this attack, it's at very least food for thought, given that there were numerous warnings about the potential for an attack by the Afghan affiliate of Daesh, ISIS-K. And, these bombings, this bombing occurred under really dubious circumstances where American personnel are like sitting ducks at the Kabul airport just waiting to get attacked. So I don't know if
Right, exactly.
Biden
Max,
directly.
let me ask you this. The chairman of the British Foreign Affairs Select Committee says the airport bombing is what defeat looks like. He says when you don't control any of the process, the West doesn't have any control, the West doesn't have any say, it's a defeat. What do you say to that?
Well, there's no question, and the only way that the U.S. could have a pretext to remain in the country militarily would be with something like this, and it's just right on cue. An attack like this happens, where, despite the fact that it is, by everyone's account, the war in Afghanistan has been ended with a complete failure. There's yet another attack that's going to draw the U.S. back in, and Afghanistan throughout history has been called the graveyard of empires, and that certainly appears to be becoming the case for the United States. And I would just like to note that it's really worth mentioning that just a few years ago, when Donald Trump dropped the mother of all bombs on ISIS-K militants in 2017, when asked for his reaction, the former Afghan president, Hamid Karzai, described ISIS as a, quote, a tool of the U.S., and that it was entirely foreign created and foreign nurtured for a foreign purpose, and went as far as to accuse the U.S. of being complicit in the rise of ISIS in Afghanistan. And Karzai was a former puppet of the U.S., so for him to be divulging the U.S.'s dirty secrets, once he started to warm in relations with Russia, I think that statement's very telling, and I think that the words of the former Afghan president, Ghani's predecessor, I'm reminded of those statements amid this attack, which occurred under very, very suspicious circumstances at the airport in Kabul today.
Okay, Max, thank you very much indeed for your time and your thoughts. Max Parry there, investigative journalist, joining us live out of New York.